Come see us on tour. We're going to be in Baltimore, Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, New York, Cohoes, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.
All right. To discuss Trump's shift on Ukraine and whether we will be seeing peace with Russia, we're going to bring in our next guest. He is author of the book Provoked: How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. He is the director of the Libertarian Institute and also antiwar.com. I'm very happy to be joined by Scott Horton.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for joining me, Scott. It's great to talk to you. I've been wanting to hear your thoughts ever since Trump announced what looks like a really radical shift in U.S. policy. Talking directly to Russia. There were these peace talks recently in Saudi Arabia with Marco Rubio and his counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. Trump criticizing Zelensky very forcefully, talking about ending this war. Just as the author of a book that shows in meticulous detail how the U.S. provoked this war and prolonged it inside Ukraine. Your thoughts on this current moment?
Well, I couldn't be more pleased. I have a lot of reservations about Trump, and including on his foreign policy on some issues from the last time around. He could have solved this the last time around, although, as I show in the book, in great part relying on your great journalism, he was completely hamstrung by the Russiagate fake scandal during that time. But he absolutely ran on this, and I believed him that he did want to put an end to this war and to get along with Russia. So my reservations about Palestine and other problems in the Middle East aside, I think that he's being true to his word here. He really does not seek great power competition with Russia, and I hope not with China. And he's made some positive notes on that issue as well, talking about kind of a overall nuclear disarmament and defense cuts and a change in posture between the great powers from one of confrontation to something much more like détente. And speaking of which, I mean, this is what they always said, Aaron, was that only Nixon can go to China. And part of that is because if a Democrat had gone to China, Nixon would have called him a commie and a sellout. You can't do that. So, but Nixon can go, just like Ronald Reagan can stand up there and make a deal with Mikhail Gorbachev. In fact, make numerous deals with Mikhail Gorbachev and his successor, H.W. Bush, as well. And it's just because of the social psychology of the situation. Here's a conservative, patriotic, Republican, tough guy, and he says it's okay to do this peaceful thing now. And so, and you got to suspect that almost getting shot to death has something to do with it. This is what he said he was running on. And you know what, Aaron, it was always interesting to me that it's such a great line and he dropped it. But in 2016, he said a couple of times, listen, I'm already old. I'm retired. My grandkids are millionaires. I got everything set. Now I'm doing this for you. I don't care. None of this is for me. This is all to try to set America right while I've got the chance. And he should have kept saying that because it's just great politics to talk that way, no matter how sincere he really was about it. But I think that you got to concede, no matter what you think what he thinks is right and whether you agree with it or not, that he thinks that it's really important now that he has this opportunity to do some things, some very important things. And some of those will be really bad, like God help the poor Palestinians and whatever. And we could talk about that. But whatever it is, he means to see some of these things through. And incompetent, sleepy old Joe Biden kicking Russia out of Christian civilization and toward Eastern Asia to Donald Trump just seems insane and wrong to do. And he means to undo it. So thank goodness for that.
Well, it's also blowback, I think, for Russiagate. I mean, right. Ukraine was used as a part of this effort to frame Trump as a Russian agent. And some of the key players in Russiagate were also all over the Ukraine proxy war. So, for example, Victoria Nuland, who was integral to the 2014 Maidan coup, to the point where there's that infamous tape of her literally selecting which Ukrainians should be in and out of government. She was the person who first authorized the very first FBI agent who met with Christopher Steele to receive his fake dossier alleging a a Trump-Russia a conspiracy, and many other people, Samantha Power, up to Barack Obama and Joe Biden, who obviously the Ukraine coup was there doing, and they also were aware of the Hillary Clinton campaign's plot to frame Trump as a Russian agent. So I think this is blowback. And also Ukrainians, unfortunately, were used in this, and they got caught up in a very partisan divide, and I think they're paying the price. There's an official who now advises Zelensky, who took part in leaking the Manafort ledger, which it looks like a fake series of documents that ultimately got Paul Manafort fired. At the time in 2016, these Ukrainians bragged about this because they were trying to stop Trump because they saw him as a threat to their agenda of more militarization and retaking the Donbass by force. So there's blowback for Russiagate. And, you mentioned your concerns about Trump given his first term. I assume that one of them is that Trump would say some good things sometimes, but then go back on it, including getting along with Russia while meanwhile he tore up the INF treaty, a really important arms control treaty, and also sent weapons into Ukraine that Obama wouldn't send. But it looks like in this case, Trump is not backing down. So let's go to a clip from just today as we're recording this, Trump speaking about Zelensky in Ukraine.
I see pictures that you fortunately don't get to see. You don't want to see them. And that is a killing field. You have young soldiers being killed, thousands a week, and we got to get it over with. It's bad for Russia, and it's bad for Ukraine, and it's bad for us on a humanitarian basis. I've had very good talks with Putin, and I've had not such good talks with Ukraine. They don't have any cards, but they play it tough. But we're not going to let this continue. This war is terrible. It would have never happened if I were president, but it did happen, so I got stuck with it, and the whole world is stuck with it. And right now you have a country that has its cities, they look like demolition sites. Those beautiful towers, those 1,000-year-old golden domes that were so beautiful, the most beautiful in the world, they say, they're all in smithereens.
So, Scott, I'm curious your thoughts on this. I mean, that line there where he says Ukraine has no cards, it's such a contradiction to what we've heard from the Biden administration that, Ukraine's on the march. If we just keep supporting them, they can win. And now Trump comes out and says, yeah, Ukraine has no cards to play at all.
Yeah. Well, and which is another way of saying that America has no cards to play versus Russia here either, which is just true and is, really unfortunate. But what's he going to do? Add more sanctions, pour in more weapons? They tried that. We're at the limit of what any of that can accomplish here. So the only thing he has to play is carrots. And so that's, I guess, what he's trying to do is simply say, listen, we're going to drop the sanctions and we're going to try to pretend like this never happened, get along with Russia and undo this whole massive civilizational divide that, Biden through various stages in his career, but particularly during his presidency, had seen fit to foist on us all. But Ukraine, I don't know. Honestly, I really don't know. And despite all the accusations by the kooks, I don't really pay much attention to Russian media at all. I don't know whether they talk about this or what the consensus is over there about whether they think they want to try to take the city of Kharkiv and even Odessa. I know that Putin's been asked about Odessa before and said, yeah, the weather's nice there. And this is, of course, the last major port city on Ukraine's southern coast, and its loss would essentially leave Ukraine landlocked. I have reason to think it would be a terrible battle for that city if the Russians tried to take it. For one thing, there's a massive tunnel system under the city ready-made for insurgency. And if there are men left willing to fight one. So I don't know if the Russians want to go that far. I think if Putin told Trump, hey, listen, actually, I'm just going to keep fighting because I'm winning and getting what I want here. I mean, I would only be mildly surprised. He ought to prioritize his relationship with the United States. But at this point, he's gone this far and he does hold all the cards. I don't know, honestly, Aaron, the actual troop strength and the order of battle and how many tens of thousands of troops the Ukrainians have here or there or in reserve or what. I know that a lot of critics have said that their military is in kind of full retreat and is being broken to bits now. But I've heard a lot of that, and it's been 3 years now, and they keep finding more reinforcements from the West somehow. And they do keep fighting. They do hold even a piece of Russian territory there in Kursk. So all is not lost for them unless you're just looking at the cards that they had to play. Again, as Trump said, they don't have many. So, this whole thing, even if you go back, I know you covered this at the time as well, that in 2022, in that fall, it was actually the weekend of September 11th, the Ukrainians made a brilliant feint in Luhansk, which worked and drove forces back. I guess originally they had made a feint down toward Kherson. And so the Russians had pulled forces out of Luhansk and down to Kherson. And then the Ukrainians had made their feint and took back all of Kharkiv Oblast and drove the Russians all the way into Luhansk. And I think even took a little bit of Luhansk back at that point. And right then, and then they also had taken back half of Kherson in the south and drove the Russians back to the eastern side of the river there. And at this point, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Milley, who I agree and accuse also as being horrible on everything, but at this point, he was the wisest in the administration speaking on this. He said to the Ukrainians, even publicly, "You boys ought to quit now while you're only this far behind." That was brilliant. What a great weekend y'all had. Now consolidate these gains. Come to the table while you've only lost this much, because there is no future for you in this war. And we know now there's a in-depth piece about this. They spoke to the man himself. So I guess it's credible, right? The New York Times piece on Antony Blinken, who was supposedly our top diplomat. The article is called Secretary of War. And it confirms in there, this is like his exit article, it confirms in there that he overruled the Pentagon's best advice in the most ridiculous fashion. This keeps happening where the State Department weenies out-hawk the warriors when the warriors say enough is enough.
I've never heard of this before in U.S. history. Maybe I'm missing it, where you had the top military official, the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, the top military leader in the country, being willing to defy the White House publicly, because this wasn't even like a private thing. He went out publicly and said, Ukraine should negotiate, contradicting what Antony Blinken was saying. And unfortunately, Antony Blinken and Jake Sullivan won because that Biden continued to fuel the war to a great disaster. And that will, when the history of this proxy war is written, that will, I think, be seen as, if history, of course, is written accurately, as just one of the great betrayals. And just so foolish. Like, you think maybe the head of the military, U.S. military, knows something about the war that Antony Blinken, who goes around playing, like, pretending he's a blues musician, wearing fancy suits, would not know. But yet, Antony Blinken is who has been guiding all this, that mindset, and look where we are today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm proud to say that the great Scott McConnell, who's one of the founders of the American Conservative Magazine, wrote a review of Provoked and said this will be the first draft of the history of this Cold War and the war in Ukraine. So I'm proud of that. It's not the final word on it, but I hope that means that future historians will have to read Provoked and have this, somewhat as part of their background for the narrative here. And I have to say that, like, virtually all the criticism is based on assumptions of what must be in there. Although I don't know, like, if you really hate me, you still look at the book. It's almost 800 pages long. So there's got to be something in there besides me just bloviating. It's all I really did was marshal a whole lot of facts and lay them all out for you there. And so I hope it's useful for people. And I think that I tried my best to be as persuasive as I could. And I think that people will agree by the end of the book that this just absolutely did not have to be this way at all.
And Scott, we had a super chat question actually for you. When will the audio version of Provoked be available?
Well, I'm actually very happy to announce that I just posted part 1 of chapter 2 today. So the H.W. Bush chapter is already up there. And I just posted part 1, which is, I think, about 3 hours of Bill Clinton, which is about a third of the Clinton chapter probably up there today. So that's through the Bosnian War. And so that is at my Substack, which is scotthortonshow.com. And then it's taken a little while, but I finally had my technical act together here. And so I should be cranking out those chapters and subchapters here as fast as I can over the next few months.
Come see us on tour. We're going to be in Baltimore, Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, New York, Cohoes, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.